Hey everyone, so I finally got around to installing my GPE ported intake manifold for my 2.7 liter Ford Bronco, and you're probably wondering, why would I install a ported manifold? Why not just install bigger turbos and just be done with it? Well, to kind of keep things short, my goal is to eke out everything I possibly can out of this motor before upgrading the turbos, and of course I want to share my findings with you all. If you watched my previous video, then you know I just recently installed a GPE ported throttle body, and after installing it I noticed better throttle response and much smoother power delivery. I can't say that there was much of a performance increase, or at least that I could feel, but man, after installing the intake manifold, everything just clicked. I'm not going to lie, I was a little intimidated by the process of removing my intake manifold, but with some help from Ducati 1098 from the Bronco 6G forums, I decided to give it a go, and big shout out to him for helping me throughout the process. Now, most of this video is going to show you how to install the GPE ported manifold, but I really wanted to talk about my experience first with this combination. So to get straight to the point, I'm really impressed with the ported combo. It took a few days of driving for the ECU to learn this combo, but once it did, I immediately noticed a difference. First of all, the throttle response improved even more. So much so that I actually had to turn down my throttle controller a notch because it was making the throttle just a little too touchy. And I don't mind having a touchy throttle, but this was just a little too much. So if you don't have a throttle controller, this combination actually might be perfect for you. Second, I can feel a power and torque difference. I don't feel it as much high up in the RPMs, but just daily driving it feels quite a bit more responsive in the low and mid range, and it doesn't struggle to get up to speed. I say the Bronco just feels overall a little bit lighter. Now the experience is very similar to the ported throttle body, but amplified and a noticeable power difference. Now I know I've been saying this for a while, but I do plan to go back to the dyno in the next month or so. I did actually go back after I installed my downpipes and charge pipes, but I saw no gains because my IATs were hanging out in the 140s. So yeah, I need to go back now that the weather is starting to cool down. I don't have dyno results to share today, but I did put together some quarter-mile draggy results for this comparison. Now I know most of you are not making your Bronco faster to take it down the drag strip, but in my opinion, making the Bronco faster just makes it a heck of a lot more fun to drive. It's kind of like a 4x4 Mustang without all the V8 noises. And you can't let those pesky Jeeps and 4Runners beat you at a stoplight, right? So if we rewind a little bit earlier this year, I did my best quarter-mile run via the draggy, as shown on screen. I did 0 to 60 in 4.35 seconds and the quarter mile in 12.89 at 103. That was the best time I had ever achieved. Now since doing that run, I was able to achieve a slightly faster 0 to 60 to the tune of 4.27, but I've only been able to do it once, and it might have been just kind of a one-off. I did install some CVS charge pipes, and I tried doing the draggy results again after the charge pipes were installed, and I couldn't get any better times. Though after the charge pipes were installed, I did notice the turbo spooled up quicker, and I would actually lose traction a lot easier as well. So if we fast forward to today, and now the weather is cooling down quite a bit, we can actually get some apples to apples comparisons with my previous best run. Now after I installed the GPE ported throttle body and the manifold, I did a couple quarter-mile pulls. I ran the best time of 4.16 0 to 60 and the best quarter-mile time of 12.77 at 104. Now these temperatures and DA are pretty close to my last best run, so I could say that this is quite an improvement. I also got my best 60-foot time of 1.79, which I wasn't sure that I could actually replicate, but I was able to do it 2 more times. In fact, one time was even 1.78. One thing to keep in mind though is that my Bronco has a custom tune on it, and it has pretty much every bolt-on that you can buy for it. So would this ported combo produce gains on a stock or mildly modified Bronco? Well, I would expect you would see some decent gains, but I'm not sure to what extent because I haven't tested it. All in all, I'm actually really glad I took the plunge and grabbed this ported combo. Out of all the bolt-ons that I've done, I'd probably say this is one of the best to improve my daily driving experience. Probably doesn't add the most HP compared to some of the others, but again, daily driving is just much better. If you're interested in picking up the ported throttle body or the manifold, or maybe both, then check out the links in the video description. The throttle body will work with 2.3, 2.7, and 3 liter Broncos, while the intake will work with a 2.7 liter found in the Bronco and the F-150. This is second gen, by the way, so 2018 and up. Additionally, I've teamed up with GPE, and if you use my code, which is found on screen, you can save an additional 5%. All right, well now it's time to move on to the install. You'll first want to disconnect the negative battery cable, as this is always recommended before you do anything performance modification wise on your Bronco. The next step is going to be to remove the clamps that attach the charge pipe to the throttle body. Now this is a process that can vary depending on the OEM charge pipes or aftermarket ones if you have them installed, but you will need to remove the bolt that holds the charge pipe to the bracket so you can also pull back the pipe away from the throttle body. And while you're down there, go ahead and remove the wiring that attaches to the sensor and the tube that connects to the charge pipe. Now with everything loose, go ahead and pull back on the charge pipe and the coupler so they are no longer attached to the throttle body. Next, remove the PCV line from the intake, and if you have a catch can like me, then you'll need to remove the bolt holding it and just go ahead and set that to the side. No need to remove the entire tube connected to the top of the valve cover, so just push that out of the way. Now we can go ahead and start disconnecting quite a few things here to ensure the wiring harness that sits on top of the manifold has enough slack. Now you can start with the sensor on top of the manifold, then go to the throttle body connector. There's also a external pump connector, and then you can remove the tube that feeds into the intake. You can pull up on the green clip and then pull the tube straight out. Then you can move to the back of the engine and start disconnecting the lines as shown here. They either use a green retaining clip like we just showed, or they have a push button mechanism. Then you're going to want to grab a clip removal tool. The ones I found to work the best are going to be the metal arm ones, as you can see here, and you can use this to pry underneath the clips as shown. There are 4 clips here under each connector. And moving on, there are 2 additional clips on the back of the intake manifold that will also need to be pried up, as you can see. And now you're going to want to pry up the main harness clip on top of the manifold as shown. Okay, now it's time to move on to the EGR system. Let's start with removing the bracket. Each nut is 8 millimeters. You can also disconnect the push clip that connects to the sensor. Now this is one of the most difficult parts of the install, so I do recommend picking up hose clamp pliers. You can remove the tube without them, but you will risk damaging the tube. You're going to start with taking some pliers and moving that clamp all the way from the bottom to the top as shown. Then grabbing the hose clamp pliers, make sure you get a bite on the metal tube underneath. You can use a flathead screwdriver to kind of pry it up a little bit, but make sure you do get a bite. And then you're going to want to squeeze the hose clamp pliers back and forth really many times. Just keep doing it over and over again until the tube will eventually come loose. It might be necessary to kind of use a flathead screwdriver to kind of get underneath there a little bit, but just keep working it and it will come off. Now we can move on to removing the 2 bolts that hold the metal EGR tube to the EGR system. These are either 8 or 10 millimeter, can't remember exactly. Next, you're going to want to go around the coils and pry the plastic standoffs up that secure the harness to the top of the boot. So you'll see here, you just make sure you remove those so you can get some more slack in the wiring harness. Now go ahead and take a second and make sure everything is disconnected and removed. You might want to grab a pair of scissors or some wire cutters to cut the zip ties that hold the harness to the top of the spark plug boots. Now just take a second and make sure everything is disconnected and ready to be moved. Once you do that, go ahead and start removing the bolts that hold the intake manifold to the lower manifold. And here's an image of the bolt locations so you have easier time locating them. Now it's time to remove the intake manifold. And again, make sure you have enough slack on the wiring harness so you can pull the intake manifold up and then towards you. And here's a quick look if you're interested in seeing what's underneath the intake manifold. You could also use this guide if you have plans to replace any of the injectors. Next, we can get the old manifold on the bench, and in my case, it's an empty bin from Target. But go ahead and remove the 4 8mm bolts that hold the throttle body onto the manifold. Next, we'll move on to the metal EGR tube. And to remove this, you'll need to pull straight out, as it's only held in by an O-ring. Make sure to inspect the O-ring for damage and replace it if needed. I went ahead and ordered a new one ahead of time, and I'll leave that part number in the video's description, but we'll get back to the EGR tube here shortly. Before that, let's compare manifolds, and you can clearly see where the throttle body opening is. It has a nice port job, and then all the ports for each cylinder have been ported as well. It's definitely a nice improvement over stock. So the ported manifold kit from GPE comes with new manifold gaskets and a throttle body gasket. So let's go ahead and throw those in. Now let's get back to the EGR tube and remove that old O-ring and install the new one. Again, I'll leave that part number in the video's description. Now we got to push that metal EGR tube back into the intake manifold and then reattach the throttle body. So now it's time to install the ported intake manifold again. Make sure there's enough slack in that wiring harness, and you're going to want to use one hand to lift up the wiring harness while you use the other to align the manifold properly. Take your time, go slowly. Once everything is aligned, you can hand tighten the bolts to make sure they all catch and thread properly. Now I waited to reinstall this tube, as you can see here, but I would recommend installing this prior to installing the intake manifold. It's just a lot easier to feed through all of this mess. The next step is a very important one. Now you're going to want to grab a torque wrench and make sure that it's set to inch-pounds, or you can grab one that's set to torque pounds. Just divide it by 12 to get that number. Now you'll need to tighten each of the bolts in stages and in specific sequences. I'm going to leave an image here on screen to show you what the sequence is and what the stages are, so take a second to pause the video to get familiar if you need to. Now, after the ported intake is bolted down, let's get back to connecting everything. And first, we'll jump back to the EGR system and reinstall the two bolts as shown. Now, these will need to be torqued to 89 inch-pounds. Then let's reattach that pesky tube and move the clamp back down to the bottom. After that, reinstall the bracket and both nuts and then reconnect the sensor. Now go back to the area as shown and just reconnect everything that you disconnected. This includes the clips on the bottom of these 4 connectors and the 2 on the back of the manifold, and then the main clip for the wiring harness on top of the manifold. Reinstall the catch can or your OEM PCV line. Lastly, the connectors at the throttle body, the additional sensors, reconnect the plastic standoffs on the coil packs, and then install new zip ties if you happen to cut any. Now you're going to want to reconnect the charge pipe and the coupler to the throttle body, and then reconnect the battery, and then you're done with the install. It's not really that hard of an install. I'd say the most difficult part, again, was that EGR tube removal, but using a set of 2 pliers really does help. Okay, folks, that's it. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you have any questions about this ported throttle body or intake manifold, then please leave a comment in the video's description, and thank you for watching.